All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the July 20th, 2022 business meeting of the Daytona Beach Community Redevelopment Agency. We're delighted to have you with us this evening, and we apologize for the delay. We had a Nexus study downstairs that we were finishing up with. At this time, we would ask that Ms. LaMagna review tonight's proceedings for the meeting.
Good evening. Agendas are available on the table in the lobby and in the front of the Commission chambers. All of the exhibits pertaining to items on the agenda are posted in the lobby. Please feel free to view the exhibits at any time during tonight's meeting. You are required to fill out a blue form to speak before the Community Redevelopment Agency. Forms are available on the table in the lobby and in front of the Commission chambers. You must complete the sections that ask for your name, address, topic of concern, agenda item number, signature, and date. The form must be completed and placed in the designated box. Resolutions under administrative item number 6 are open for public comments, and you may fill out a blue form to speak when that item is called. All citizens completing the blue form will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes. When you approach a lectern, please speak clearly into the microphone and give your full name and address. The 3-minute clock on the monitor above and in front of you will start running when you begin to speak. Pay close attention to your time. You will be told when your time has expired. Disorderly conduct in the public meeting of City Commission. Article 2, Section 6238 of the City Code of Ordinances reads as follows. It shall be unlawful for any person to behave in a riotous or disorderly manner in any public meeting of the City Commission or any committee, agency, or board thereof, or to cause any unnecessary disturbances therein by force, shouting, or any other action that is calculated to disrupt such meeting, or to refuse to obey any ruling of the presiding officer or such meeting relative to the orderly process thereof. Please be courteous and respectful of the views of others. Personal attacks on the Community Redevelopment Agency, city staff, or members of the public are not allowed. Please silence cell phones and other wireless devices during the meeting. All conversation must take place either at the lectern or on the dais so that everyone can hear the business being discussed tonight.
Ms. LaMagna, may we have a roll call?
Commissioner Reed?
Here.
Commissioner Traeger?
Here.
Commissioner Strickland?
Here.
Commissioner May?
Here.
Commissioner Cantu?
Here.
Commissioner Henry? Mayor Derek L. Henry.
Here. This time, we will have our invocation led by Commissioner Henry, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Reed. Please rise for the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance.
Gracious Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to gather once again. We ask and pray, Heavenly Father, that you will lay your hands on each and every one of us. Lay your hands on our hearts that we may make the very best decision that we can for the people that we serve. In your Son, Jesus' name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We'll now move on to item number 4, which is approval of the minutes of the July 6, 2022 meeting of the Community Redevelopment Agency.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Reed, and we'll take a second from Commissioner Cantu. Do we have any questions or comments? All those in favor, let it be noted by saying aye.
Aye.
Those in opposition, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. This time, we'll have our agenda approval. If there are any changes, our city manager will address them.
Yes, Honorable Mayor, Commissioners, there are no changes for tonight's CRA meeting.
All right.
Motion to approve.
Take a motion from Commissioner Traeger and a second from Commissioner May. All those in favor, let it be noted by saying aye.
Aye.
Those in opposition, same sign. This motion carries 7-0.
Okay. We'll now move on to item number 6, which is our administrative items. Item number 6A is the City Manager's Office amended and restated Riverfront Esplanade Development Maintenance and Lease Agreement. This is a resolution. A resolution approving the amended and restated Riverfront Esplanade Development Maintenance and Lease Agreement between the city's Community Redevelopment Agency and the Brown Riverfront Esplanade Foundation, Inc., to amend and consolidate the previous agreement and amendments and to provide clarifications and revisions regarding installation of certain improvements, alterations and maintenance of improvements, operations, and city funding, authorizing the mayor as the CRA chair and the city clerk to execute the agreement and providing an effective date.
We have a motion and a second. All right, we have speakers.
I do have speakers for this item, Mr. Mayor. Our first speaker is Jason, I believe it's Otterberg, and on deck is Ann Ruby.
Good evening, and Commission. My name is Jason Alftenberg. I live at 220 South Frederick Avenue. I'm in part speaking on behalf of the St. John's River to Sea Loop Alliance, which I'm a board member for. I also represent Volusia at large on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee of the River to Sea Transportation Organization, which I'm currently chair. I wanted to speak about the Esplanade Trail, which is very beautiful. I saw on the agenda that the Sweetheart Trail was being located to Beach Street, and I didn't know what that implied about the larger context of the Sun Trail system, the East Coast Greenway, and the St. John's River to Sea Loop. The St. John's River to Sea Loop is a 260-mile loop. The East Coast Greenway goes from Key West to Maine, and the downside of the Beach Street, I don't know if those designations follow the Sweetheart Trail when it moves to Beach Street, but to cross US 92 at surface level in the crosswalk is substandard compared to going under the bridge by this library. So it becomes less of a showcase trail for the East Coast Greenway and the St. John's River to Sea Loop Alliance if the alignment doesn't go under the busy highway. And the other thing I want to say is when you get to Main Street, there's currently a very narrow sidewalk along Main Street up to where the crosswalk, thank you for the new crosswalk, by the way, at the north end of the Esplanade Trail, that's great. But it's not it's currently just a narrow sidewalk north of Bay Street. And I think you're gonna narrow Beach Street up to Main Street, but just consider the path needs to be widened along Main Street as well. So I just don't know what this implies about the larger interests of the trail system by moving the Sweetheart Trail. So mainly questions and concerns.
Okay. Can you answer that when he's finished? Can you answer it when we finish with public comment? Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. He'll answer the question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Ann Ruby, and on deck is Tracy Remar.
Ann Ruby, 137 Park Avenue. One of the most astounding things I've ever heard said at this podium is that the Esplanade Foundation is learning as they go, that they're muddling through. I think their inexperience contributed to the cost overruns that more than doubled their original estimate. This lease shifts the basis for their annual reimbursement from maintenance to capital improvements, which is a good idea. However, the foundation, perhaps through inexperience, has proven poor stewards of their own money, as evidenced by their initial cost overruns. I think we need to require better stewardship over our reimbursement expenses. This lease allows the foundation the privilege of requesting increases in their annual reimbursement, which could necessitate spending ad valorem funds. With that privilege should come responsibility. That responsibility should be evidenced in a transparent, well-documented, competitive selection process. Anytime the commission needs to approve reimbursable expenses, the foundation should be required to show their work as part of the public record. Just to establish good habits, I think that documentation should be required in this lease for all their reimbursable expenses. If that requirement is too burdensome, then here's a way to simplify the process while managing the city's reimbursable expenses with some accountability. The reimbursement amount is firmly capped at $800,000 and is available only while the CRAs are in existence. No increases, no payments from ad valorem funds. That gives the foundation a clear annual budget and with city manager approval allows them free rein in their selection of capital improvement vendors. I hope the inexperienced foundation would welcome the opportunity to make and document fiscally responsible decisions in purchasing our capital improvements. Let's gift them with that opportunity for growth and learning. The first version of the lease didn't involve Manatee Island. The foundation and many of you expressed with great certainty that the Esplanade would be a game changer on Beach Street. If that praiseworthy iteration of the Esplanade didn't need Manatee Island, why the rush to involve it now? I understand removing deed restrictions can take time, but removing deed restrictions should be a specific discussion, not tucked away in a 44-page lease. Let's give the Esplanade a few years to demonstrate its transformative power before making the commitment to remove deed restrictions. I truly can see the appeal of a restaurant on Manatee Island, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Natural places are rare and welcome respites in urban downtowns. Why immediately start trying to alter such a unique asset with the clatter of dishes and the chatter of diners? What's the rush? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tracy Remark, and on deck is Sandy Murphy.
Tracy Remark, 815 North Oleander Avenue. The city's lease agreement with the Brown Esplanade Foundation states that while this is not a traditional TPF, nonetheless, it is a publicly accessible, family-oriented outdoor venue. In Section 7H, the Brown Foundation agrees there shall be no discrimination against any persons on account of race, sex, etc. And the first item on that list is non-discrimination against any person on account of disability status. In Section 9A, the Brown Foundation agrees it shall comply strong legalese, for there's no getting around this, with all applicable ordinances, statutes, laws, and regulations of our city, our state, and the U.S. government. The Americans with Disabilities Act became law July 26, 1990. While the Esplanade restrooms provide for handicap accessibility, while there are swings, obviously, for handicapped children, while there are ramps to the bathrooms and from the sidewalk into the Esplanade, while the concrete walkways are extra wide for wheelchairs, while there are numerous parking spaces along Beach Street, I defy you to find even a single solitary handicap parking space anywhere. The ADA requires them in federal law, Florida Statute 553 requires them in state law, and the city's LDC requires them here. The Esplanade, while privately managed, is still government property, partially supported by government tax money. They do not meet the extremely few exceptions in the ADA law. How do I know there's no handicap parking? I brought my husband, who is wheelchair bound, and we experienced that lack firsthand. Fortunately, Joe Yarborough, who came out to question why I was backing into one of the station's private off-street parking spaces so I could safely get my husband and his wheelchair out of the van, allowed us to park there. The street parking is not usable as the sidewalk curb cuts are only located at the pedestrian crossings or the Votran stops. As for the street side of those spaces, we would be getting out of the van and into his wheelchair in the actual traffic lane, certainly unsafe. Given the language in the lease about events, art shows, weddings, food and beverage facilities, and all of that, the request for the city's alcohol license, which I'm against, by the way, unless limited to actual events rather than 365 days a year, I can't imagine that my husband will be the only disabled visitor needing a handicap parking space. Given that the city will provide $11.2 million over the next 14 years for capital improvements, those completed and those to come, I would think handicap parking should be the first improvement undertaken so the Esplanade is truly accessible to all persons without discrimination. By the way, I'm totally against extending the CRA another 32 years and pouring $25.6 more million into the Esplanade Foundation. I'd do no more than 8 or 10 years, by which time downtown should be on its feet economically. Thank you. And actually, saying all that, I also thank the Browns for getting us this far.
Our next speaker is Sandy Murphy, and on deck is John Nicholson.
Good evening, Sandy Murphy, 136 Park Avenue. I think that there are some good things about this lease change, one of which is making tracking expenditures a lot simpler on our side by making it a reimbursement for capital expenditures rather than following all the operating costs that happen in the operation of a park. But there are some things in there that are of concern to me. One of them is the proposal to remove deed restrictions on Manatee Island. I think that many citizens would be opposed to removing those deed restrictions, and I think that it is somewhat disingenuous to put that permission inside a lease that's ending up on a consent agenda when your commission meeting begins. I think the public deserves an opportunity to speak specifically on that topic, and so I would like to see that changed. Secondly, I understand that the thinking is to bring food service to Manatee Island, which I would say there are many appropriate places along Beach Street where we can still enhance the dining experience, and why we would put that in what is currently a conservation area and a kind of peaceful retreat area in the park, that seems counterintuitive to me. Secondly, the Josie Rogers House. There is nothing in the agreement that I can see that specifies that the character of the home, the historic character, should be maintained and that it should be developed as close as possible to its appropriate historic character. And I would like to see that as a requirement of the lease. Finally, the city agrees to participate with the foundation on any public or private grant awards to benefit the premises. I think that's an incredibly broad statement. We might be put in a position where we would prefer to pursue a grant for a city project, and here we would be competing with the Esplanade Foundation for that same grant that we're forced to support. So I think more careful language would be called for, rather than just saying we will support any and all grant applications that the Esplanade makes. In general, there are a lot of things that go on in this lease. I think it raises the requirement for the City Commission to be careful stewards, to be attentive to what's going on. There have been a lot of promises made. When I went and looked at the other parks cited in the lease, a lot of them are much more interactive than what we're seeing so far. So I urge you to stay on top of that and make sure that we're getting the fullest value that we can for what is a large sum of money for a very poor city. Thank you.
We do have one more speaker. Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. Our final speaker is John Nicholson.
John Nicholson, 413 North Grandview Avenue. Rather than at the end of my comments, I'd start at the beginning. I want to thank Hyatt for the park. All right, the city wanted for years, I think it was 12 years, to do a park. We never had the funds to do it. There was never a chance of getting the funds to do it. And it was given a gift. And when he gave the gift to us, he made a comment. He's never had such a hard time giving away money. And it's the truth, all right? When you talk to anybody, everybody's looking to see what the catch is, all right? I also did. People were talking to me is, what is this actually saying? What is Hyatt actually asking for? Then I asked him, he said, I'm not asking for anything. The city is. So let it be known that the city is asking for this, and the city has reasons, all right? I absolutely agree that we should look at everything. We watch the wording, because everything is in the details, okay? That I agree with wholeheartedly, but it's not at his request. It's at ours. Secondly, I wouldn't put handicap parking in there either, because if you recall, when we were doing this, we were talking about redoing North Beach Street. He was expecting a lot more parking than we're going to give him. But I pushed for a median so that it looked like the rest of downtown. So the parking will come when we redo Beach Street. It will be there. I'm absolutely positive he will see to it that there is parking and that all the regulations will be there. Josie Rogers House, absolutely. It's got to be historic. It is our fault that we let the rec center get where it is. It is our fault that we allowed Josie Rogers House to get as bad as it is. So we need to redo Josie Rogers House historically. That's why it's there. We have to do what we can to enhance downtown. And this, everything that's done so far, it's not exactly what I wanted. It's his vision, and he's paying for it. For God's sake, we're going to benefit from it. And lastly, the restaurant. Sorry, Hyatt. I don't like the idea of a restaurant on Manatee Island. The volume of trees and whatnot that we're going to have to take out to put a restaurant there. Will people walk the distance from Beach Street through the park onto Manatee Island? I'm not quite sure. But again, it's up to the City Commission. And anything that you're going to do in the future, it all has to come back to you or some future commission. There's nothing nefarious here. Thank you.
And that was my final speaker.
If there is anyone else who wishes to speak on this item, which is on the consent agenda in the next meeting, we would ask that you go ahead and sign up at this time to speak on it at this time. So I don't want to deprive anyone of the opportunity to discuss this issue. And there's no one else. Okay. But that doesn't include us. It means the citizens. Drew?
Good evening, Drew Driscoll, Deputy City Manager and Fire Chief. John, yes, it is my fault for bringing this forward. This is a consolidation of the 3 previous amendments to the master lease agreement. One of my responsibilities via the manager is oversight of the Esplanade and make sure that they're compliant with their requirements of the lease agreement. And there's some bifurcation, so part of my request was for this consolidation. Within this consolidation, language was added to improve the Esplanade's understanding that it is a privately managed public facility. The agreement also redefines the route of the Sweetheart Trail and recognizes the Esplanade Trail. As we heard the public speaker earlier, the concern, the Sweetheart Trail will still exist. It'll be on Beach Street. We know that we have phase 2 of Beach Street improvements coming. So that'll be a thought of the Beach Street 2 phased improvements. And the Esplanade Trail will be a spur of the overall Greenway Trail system. The agreement states that we'll work in good faith to remove the state deed restrictions on Manatee Island. Again, as John referenced, that anything moving past our initial effort to release those state restrictions will come before this board. If they wish to put a new amphitheater, it'll come before this board. If they desired for a restaurant, it will come before this board. This is just trying to offer direction to city staff via the manager's office that we have direction to proceed in assisting removal of the state deed restrictions. This also does provide for a grant of ARPA funds in the amount of $600,000 for the renovation, expansion, and improvement of Josie Rogers' house. Currently known as, or it's technically known as Rogers' house, but Josie Rogers' house, as we all know, was the first female doctor in Daytona Beach and also the first female mayor in Daytona Beach. The $600,000 grant for the renovation and expansion, information is provided in the packet reciting a quote from a construction firm. Since then, we have received preliminary architectural renderings that maintain the historic charm of the building, and they're available for you to see. The lease agreement also provides for the utilization and activation of Josie Rogers' house. This utilization could be as a cafe, ice cream shop, or concessionaire, or other complementary use that the public would enjoy while enjoying the Esplanade area. The second floor could be used as offices for their event staff. The grant sets forth requirements for planned improvements, operating hours, and also quarterly reports required for this grant funding. Again, it's ARPA funds. We report to the feds how we're utilizing this. It is authorized use to improve park spaces for the funds, so they'll provide us quarterly reports. The agreement improves the insurance requirements along with the addition of a liquor liability coverage. And also in this agreement, it shows that we are asking for the city's good faith support to assist them in the application process for their own alcohol license. Currently, the city owns an alcohol license for Josie Rogers. They wish to have one to help activate the area for their special events and weddings and whatnot. The changes in the city contribution improves the CRA compliance and transparency in allowing for the reimbursement of eligible capital expenses as opposed to the current operating expenses. It's also important to note that these capital expenditures, whether it's a restroom or a park bench for that matter, the larger items are deeded to the city. So the city will possess in our name the Crest Building restroom or the Burgoyne restroom. So those are within our ownership. Lastly, the agreement allows for the installation of the Mary McLeod Bethune statue and also the Charters of Freedom that we previously discussed that we wanted relocated in the Beach Street area, which they have set aside and already prepped position for those charters amendments. As far as some of the information shared from the speakers, again, this is a consolidation of previous agreements. Previous agreements stated that we would support any grant efforts that was for previous amendments. As far as the duration of the city's contribution responsibility, that has not changed. Only what we're spending on the capital expenditures as opposed to the operating expenses. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions from this commission? Okay, good job. Thank you, sir.
You said something about capital expenditures. I thought we were only going to be responsible for the maintenance up to 800,000.
That is what we've done in this. Again, a city request to do it was to clarify what our money was going towards. So we are doing a reimbursement of capital expenditures as opposed to the reimbursement of maintenance funds, up to $800,000, which was previously existed.
So we only are responsible up to $800,000. If the maintenance charges are only $600,000, we are still obligated for $200,000 more for capital improvements?
No, ma'am. The operating expenses goes away, and we are only responsible for up to $800,000 annually for capital expenditures. And Bob, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Accurate. Or if I misstate.
And what about the capital expenditures that have started already? Are we going to reimburse, or are there just capital expenditures going forward?
Only if they have not already reached their $800,000. This year is the first year in which they've already requested reimbursement on a quarterly basis. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the last quarterly request already brings them to the $800,000.
So we're only obligated $800,000 a year.
Yes, ma'am.
And if the capital expenditures go on, or more than that in this certain year, does it carry over to the next year, or?
Yes. So, for instance, the Crest restroom's already constructed, and I don't know if that's the name. It looks like the Crest building to me. Next year, perhaps, they'll put in for the Crest reimbursement of the Crest restroom up to $800,000. The following year, they may put in for the Burgoyne restroom, and so on and so forth. If there's new capital improvements approved by the commission that aren't included in the approved master plan, those would be eligible in future years. And this does not effectively, I heard a comment, this does not extend the CRA. The CRA ends in 2036, but our obligation does not.
But we're not going to pay more than $800,000 a year?
That is correct.
Tied to any consumer price inflation or anything?
That is correct.
It
Up
is-
to $800,000 a year, period.
Period. Okay.
And that language, and not to confuse anyone, but that language that they could request from this commission future increases, that existed in the very first document. And they have not come forward for that request.
But it would be up to the city commission whether they would approve an increase in that?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I was under the impression it was up to $800,000.
Up to $800,000 annually,
But
annual
for
city
maintenance,
contribution.
And if the maintenance was $600,000, then
Maintenance has gone away. Now moving forward is only capital expenditure reimbursement up to $800,000 a year.
is there any estimate on how much the maintenance is going to be per year?
That will be their responsibility.
No, I mean, as of now, I mean, if the maintenance is going to be $200,000 and we're obligating ourselves to $800,000, that's a bit.
I think from our current fiscal year in which they've requested reimbursement, we have already crossed that reached that $800,000 responsibility threshold.
Yeah, but there's building, not maintenance.
It was operating expenses as whole, which included maintenance, the staffing, and other items as outlined in the original lease.
I see. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Commissioner Strickland?
I just, I'm okay with the statue going in. I'm okay with repairing the Josie Rogers house because it was the city's responsibility before the Esplanade took over the park. and allowed it to get in that shape. My concern is we're going to be using tax money for capital improvements, and we have a private park that can decide who is appropriate, who's not appropriate, homeless can't go there, those kinds of things. And I feel like that if we're going to put public money in, everybody in the public, all 74,000 of us, I just saw the updated number on the wall in the city manager's office, should be allowed to go there. And it's going to have hours. The gates will close. There won't be anybody camping in there and that sort of thing. And if we're going to do the capital improvements, we need very, how would you say, open record and accountability for what's going on and where the money's going. And the Manatee Island deed restrictions being removed, I am not for that for a second. I ran on a platform of I would never vote to remove deed restrictions and give away a square inch of public property. We got many cities in this country that would give anything to have public green space that we have, and we work really hard at giving it away. So that's where I stand with this going forward.
I had another question on the capital expenses. Does the city commission approve that, or does the foundation approve them?
The city staff receives will receive an annual report that shows what they're requesting for reimbursement of capital
And does the
expenditures.
commission pass on that, or does?
No, the city staff does.
Let me add, the commission approves the capital improvements.
That's
Yes.
correct.
For any new capital improvements going in, the city commission would have to approve it.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm also with him. Our forefathers, and I repeat, our forefathers, had restrictions put on Manatee Island. And they did that because they had also restrictions at that time on the park and City Island. And that was so that it would remain in our hands, or the public hands, for all of our residents. And it would be to put these public resources for our residents to enjoy and not be used for commercial purposes. These properties were meant to stay for all of our residents' use and not be put in private hands forever, and that is what it would be. Possibly, if we work toward getting restrictions, deed restrictions off that Manatee Island Park. The state wanted $8 million to remove restrictions from City Island. And like he said, most cities would give their ITs to have a riverfront park like we do. And when Mr. Burgoyne gave us the riverfront park, he was a very wealthy man, and he had a large mansion home there and was the corner of Bay Street and Beach Street. And his yacht was docked on the outside there, and his yacht was called the Sweetheart. So that's how we got the Sweetheart Trail. A lot of people thought it was a different reason why it was. But he would definitely not want to have it, Manatee Island, I'm sure, put into private hands. And I think about the other thing, that this is one thing that was tried before, I think 2 or 3 times, and it didn't fly. And I don't think it should fly now. Our premise for approving the Brown and Brown building and everything we were doing was to incentivize Beach Street. Now, if we have some restaurants in competition with the other restaurants that are on Beach Street, that is not going to help Beach Street one little bit. So I am, too, am very much against taking off deed restrictions on Manatee Island.
Okay. Commissioner, no comment? Commissioner Cantu, Commissioner Henry? All right. Any other questions for Drew? No other questions? Okay.
I do, right quick.
Go ahead.
You were talking about reimbursement for the 2 restrooms that have already been built. How are we retroactively going back and paying for those capital improvements? How do we justify that?
they are able to put in for them in future years in lieu of the original operating expenses. The money they've already received for operating expenses, that is that. We're not retroactively going back for capital expenditures. Those will be for their future year request for reimbursement.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's just a lot of, I won't say confusion, but, anytime people, you get something, sometimes folks don't trust the intentions. And unfortunately, when government is involved, sometimes people feel like you're just trying to give away something. This is a park, and it costs money to keep the park. It's something we all have to understand. It costs money to maintain the park. And Manatee Island has been closed most of my tenure as mayor. Just closed. Beautiful space. Now, we all know that it's just a beautiful space, but we have proven to be incapable of maintaining it so that it is beneficial to the public. I don't think anyone here has ill or malintent towards people who are homeless. But the reality is that sometimes the two do not make spaces like Manatee Island useful for all of society if you don't find a way. And we as a community have done and are doing what we can to try to address that issue. But at the end of the day, it costs money to run these spaces. And by saying that we're asking to remove the deed restriction, I supported that. And I supported that in the past. I support it now because it gives us the capacity to control the space, to do with what we want to do on the space. And so some people may not support that. I support being able to make the decisions about the space. I also support finding a way to make the space pay for itself. Otherwise, we keep the space and it continues to do what it's doing. It's not useful to anyone. I wouldn't, even when we had it, I wouldn't go down there. So let's remember that. In the past, I realized that yes, they will be competing for grants, and sometimes they will compete for grants against us. It's okay for me. I've written grants, and the manager will tell you, I write grants all the time to support grants that compete against us. It's a good idea, it's a good idea. It doesn't all come through the city. You have other agencies that have good ideas that are going to be beneficial to the community. And if they are going for a grant, it's beneficial to the community. Now, here's where I have a problem. It costs $600,000 to fix the Josie Rogers house. I will support it tonight, but I'm going to tell you what my preference is, just so we know, because I believe we should have discussion. My preference is not that we use ARCA funds. You all have to remember that we've, of course, there's a time when a commission and the staff don't always agree. We have to determine you're not going to get ARCA funds another time in your life. And we have, as a commission, in general, established a precedence that says that these ARCA funds are for recovery from COVID. And so as a community, how do we recover from COVID? How do we recover from all the things that have happened with COVID? And I don't think that Josie Rogers House fits the bill as needing recovery from COVID. So I think we should find another way to pay for it. And if we come back to the table later and we say that, well, we can't find another way, then we still have the ARCA funds. You don't have to rush off and spend ARCA funds. You have a certain amount of time in 6 years. So I think, this is my recommendation to us. My recommendation is that we approve it and we, it's all right, it happens to my mother all the time, I always say that. And me too sometimes. So my recommendation is that we approve it, but with the expectation that staff come back with another funding mechanism, and then if they can't find another funding mechanism, then we still have that at our disposal to say that we want to use ARCA funds for that. But you're not getting ARCA funds again. And we've used ARCA funds to support our businesses and to support our residents. That's what we've used them for. Now, the county, they had $100 million, and you could hardly see much of it go towards residents and business. But we are the ones that need to be able to respond from that. So I think we've spoken. Is there any other questions? And first of all, I want to know if you all agree with my assessment as to the payment. Because if you don't, then we just pay for it out of ARCA funds and move on.
Where would the money come from? I know that that'd be creative, but I'm just curious, where would that come from, sir? Any ideas?
I couldn't tell you right now, other than looking at the general fund. One of the key concerns we have now is having the construction group ready and prepared to go ahead and improve the Josie Rogers House, and I think that's what staff have been working on. But we will have to pull it from general fund dollars, and that's funds that we have now. Drew, do you have any? Yeah.
It's our fault that Josie Rogers' house is in that state because we've had it for so long and we've moved it twice. It's a 100-year-plus home. You don't move that just on a whim.
I agree with
without
you.
some problems with it. And also, according to Manatee Island, I do not want to see a bunch of condos up there.
This is not about condos at this moment, but I understand.
It will be.
I don't. And that's the fear that people have, is that we move the deed restrictions, then people will come in and put condos. I understand that. I ain't doing that. But I'm not going to be here in 10, 20 years, and future commissions could. But that's not what I want to do. So if you don't want to support that part because you don't want deed restrictions removed, I understand. The question is on the floor at this moment in time is, where would the money come from? And
General fund, yeah.
Drew?
With regard to the ARPA fund allocation for this year, we have another $7.5 million that the city has received. On August 3rd, we have a budget workshop and also a presentation, as we did last year, of the staff recommendations. The city itself, the city government, also experienced the effects of COVID. We paid $4 million in stimulus for the utility fees. We deferred certain maintenance or purchases, I should say. And also our costs have escalated for other items that we had always planned on taking on, community projects that help us all prosper. And that's where the notion of Josie, the $600,000 coming from ARPA, is to help support the city, which supports the community as a whole. As far as additional locations, I'm judging from the look, we will try to look for other sources.
Look, we replaced the $4 million in less than 6 months to a year. So, I don't want to get into an argument about where they find the money from, because I don't want to get into an argument about that. But you all have to remember that you determine you ain't getting ARCA funds again. And you need to be the ones to determine that. And the manager knows, he knows how I feel about that. But it's up to you to just, and I understand Drew's consensus. There's just so many other ways to spend ARCA money and then and I understand that it was $4 million. We could have taken the whole $4 million and said, we spent $4 million to give people a rebate on their water bills and used it that way. And it would have been $4 million fairly spent, but we didn't do that.
Share a comment that my manager tells me all the time: if you tell us to do this, then that's what we're doing.
Well,
we sleep well at night, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to convince 4 of my colleagues to tell you to do it a different way.
Yes, sir.
And I always just say, if we take it from somewhere, it cuts from somewhere else.
And we have a budget for which we have questions about.
Yeah.
And things that we gotta look at, and it's a budget that we have to address. But I think for tonight, we don't have to answer that question tonight.
No.
Yes, sir.
But
You're
are
right.
you all in agreement that they can go somewhere else and look for that money?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions? All right, we'll take a vote on this item. We'll take a roll call vote.
Okay. Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Traeger?
No, because of Manatee Island.
Commissioner Strickland?
No.
Commissioner May?
Yes.
Commissioner Cantu?
Yes.
Commissioner Henry? Mayor Derek L. Henry?
Yes, because of Manatee Island.
5-2.
Exactly.
This motion carries 5-2, and thank you all for your commitment. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Yarborough, for what you're doing. Thank you, residents, and everyone who's supporting all of Daytona Beach. This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene as quickly as possible.